I forgot to turn my camera on. Look at that. I'm Marky Dragon, also known as Marcus Eikenberry in real life, and let me turn on my camera. I can't believe it. You know, who would want to see me anyway? Okay, so there we go. Hello, everybody, and welcome to everybody who is joining us from the Hangout. So,
hello.
What an exciting start. Not really. It's always got to be something, huh?
Just blame it on technology.
Yeah, I know. Damn on-off switches. So, today we've got Evil is here, right? You here, Evil?
Yes, I'm here. I'm always here.
Hello, Mr. Evil. Yes. So, today's topic is sponsored by Evil Overlords.
So now I just got to start putting stuff up on my YouTube channel.
Personal dungeons.
Oh yeah.
And well, just dungeons in general. So, Evil, tell us your idea of dungeons for the game.
Okay. In a nutshell, everybody's been talking about building houses and castles and stuff. However, I think very much that I think very firmly that the delves in the game should be mostly for giving us the tools to build our own stuff. If we're going to be taking this from a player point of view, and everybody's going to have their own idea of what they want to do in the game. It's very similar to Eve, but in this regard, I want to be able to have players add in their own dungeons, or find previously existing dungeons and rebuild them or upgrade them. If you have, for instance, I want my own castle out in the middle of nowhere, and the only way into the castle is through the dungeon. Mm-hmm. Unless you want to, storm the front gate and risk having siege weapons used on your party. Which some players might decide they want to do at some point. However, player-created content frees up the delves to implement better tools, and it means the game is never repeated. Another thing I think would be important from a development perspective is, instead of having the same dungeon run by 50 different parties, make it so that the dungeons get depleted. They don't go away. They're like rock formations or ecological, areas where you have a party come through, wipes out everything in the dungeon, steals all the loot, and now you have an empty dungeon. Mm-hmm. Another group comes along, they find this dungeon, and they're like, ooh, we're going to go raid a dungeon, blah, 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 we found a dungeon. And they go in, and they find a bunch of skeletal monsters that are all dead. Nothing, no undead or anything like that, no treasure. They might find a few traps that the first party didn't activate, but that's about it. Total bust for the second party. Now, word gets around that this dungeon over here is empty, and everybody just kind of, leaves it alone. They're all looking in other places. Well, suppose some monsters decide, oh, there's a dungeon here. It's empty. Let's move in. Mm-hmm. And then that is how the dungeons get repopulated for just plain being, dungeons that are just sitting there. Mm-hmm. That way, you never know what you're going to find when you go into the dungeon. It's not level-based by any stretch of the imagination because the game's not level-based. Mm-hmm. So you have this constantly evolving game. Now, let's say a group of players decide, well, we're going to destroy the entrance to the dungeon. We're going to cave it in. The dungeon disappears from the map unless somebody knows where it's at and decides to dig it out. This also prevents monsters from repopulating it. So you're going to have people who do really weird things in the game, and people that decide to do things that are totally out of the norm, just to, whether it be denying monsters the entrance to the dungeon or denying the use of the dungeon. Now, if you got player-created dungeons, the tools that would build, for instance, a castle or a house could be used specifically for doing the building of dungeons and setting traps, and you can hire monsters or lure monsters in to become part of the dungeon. You know, every creature in the world has a different motivation. So it's a matter of leaving the world completely open to the prospects of what the players want to do in it. This creates a completely different standard of how devious these things become. Because, I don't know, you're familiar with Eve, you've run missions in Eve, you know how boring missions in Eve get. There's absolutely no way to document this on the web. You can document where dungeons are, but what you're going to find in them, you never know. Maybe you'll find nothing. Maybe you'll find a dragon, and you all get fried.
What about the? I'm hearing a lot of complexity with this.
Yes.
And complexity is not necessarily bad as long as it's transparent to the player, because the player is there to have fun.
Yes.
And complexity can get in the way of fun. We don't want that.
True. Well, then maybe the player will want to be evil and start his own.
Well, so that's part of the thoughts here is that this. I don't like the idea of gearing up, getting ready to go out adventuring, and going to go to a dungeon to find that there's nothing there. It just doesn't feel right. I think that would detract from my fun. But at the same time, I know exactly what you're saying. I don't want the dungeon to be the same every time, and I just keep going through it over and over again, just doing whatever. Maybe there needs to be both. Maybe dev dungeons are some really big, really elaborate things that maybe would take hours to get to the bottom of. Whereas player-made dungeons, could also be a lot of fun, but not as complex. Or maybe they are the ones that are complex, and the dev ones are not nearly as complex.
Well, that's why I'm presenting the idea, because I prefer complex things. I prefer things that are always in motion and always changing. My big concern, and this is where I've had a lot of problems in other games other than Eve, is usually dev-created dungeons get very boring very quickly. Mostly because any player can come along and look it up on the internet and say, oh, you're going to find X, Y, and Z in this dungeon, and this is where they're at. Perhaps dev-created dungeons have an in with NPCs, NPC monsters, and there's a level of evolution in that dungeon where a stronger party comes in and takes, a dungeon gets wiped out, and then, there's some bigger plan rotating in the world, and this is one of the places that the big bad has to maintain. So they're going to send more monsters that are stronger into that dungeon. This isn't just a thing for the players. This could be a way for devs to introduce bigger storylines. You have certain areas where the evil guys have to maintain their control over that area for whatever reason. Players might not know that up front. They might not even know that it's being controlled by, a big bad evil creature. There are ways to implement this in a fashion where you get not only fun in a regular dungeon that's regularly used, but you can also have player-created items. I personally want to be the bad guy. I like the idea of being the bad guy. This creates a whole level of PvP as well. You know that when you walk into one of my dungeons, there's going to be, I'm PvPing with you even if you're not directly confronting me personally. It's my wits against your wits, or your party's wits. And maybe you'll completely wipe out my dungeon and steal everything in there. then I have to spend the money to repopulate it, you know? I mean, the idea is to keep the content fresh. However it's achieved, I always want the content to be fresh in the game. And if you're a delve trying to just, build dungeons all day, that gets so boring. And ideas get repeated, and there's no change in the game, or very little change. There's a variation on dungeon X, Y, and Z that's A, B, and C, but any player who's played the game long enough is going to get bored with that.
Well, let me ask a question here. How many of you have played games where there was dungeons and had visited the same dungeon, say, 100 times?
World of Warcraft.
Yeah,
Exactly.
World of Warcraft, yes.
No.
Hardcore raiding.
And so what is the draw to come back to that same dungeon again over and over again? Is it the fact that it requires a lot of people all working together to and executing correctly to beat it, or is it that there's something else that's fun about it?
To get the loot you didn't get last time.
Yeah, just gear and loot.
Well, I mean, it's a lot about the loot. People talking about sort of dungeons really for the loot, but if we're sort of looking at this game where mobs don't drop loot because it's all player made, then most people wouldn't keep repeating a dungeon because the loot is not there.
Well,
That's an interesting thought.
It's not always about the loot, because sometimes you have everything, and you're just there to have some fun with friends.
Yeah, less than 1%. 1%. Less than 1%.
I'm one of that.
Yeah, I never
1%.
played enough
Now-
to have everything.
here's the other thing, though. If you have dev-created dungeons, and they're always evolving, it could be a way to add items, rare items or exotic items into the game slowly. And since it's based on parties actually going out and doing these dungeons, I mean, there should be some sort of profit motive involved there. I have no objection to that, and I have no objection to the devs moving the storyline of the world along with it. In fact, I would prefer they do it that way. I don't want it to be a, you demanded it, we're going to build it, and here it is. I want it to be snuck in. People have to gather information. People have to gather, they find a sword. We were talking about crafting items. They find a sword. They have no idea what the power of the sword is. They just know that it's, a really nice sword. And, oh, by the way, it just so happens to be cursed as well because, well, a necromancer made it.
Yeah. It was just getting me thinking, about the fact of everything trying to be player created and whether or not what kind of loot would spawn on monsters. But it'd be totally cool if you get killed by a monster that he loots you, and then or the monsters around loot you. And then as you kill them, you're picking up the loot from other dead players.
Yes, exactly.
Or maybe
That could be very interesting.
that the mobs in a dungeon, at the back of the dungeon, you'll find a treasure chest that someone else has left, be it dev created or someone else that's died in there. Their loot goes into a treasure chest, so rather than the mobs, like a dragon wouldn't be wearing a shield or a sword, but that could actually appear in a treasure chest at the back, so you need to kill the mobs to get to that treasure chest to then be able to find the loot. And that can be advanced stuff that the aliens have brought down years before or whatever, but put in that treasure chest, so like plans and formulae for various bits and pieces.
I could
get loot that way.
I could totally see a dragon going out and foraging for things from his dungeon, and killing players, picking things up, killing other animals, getting the meat, taking the hides, stuff like that, and taking them back to his treasure chest, and that the prize could be that when you actually get down there and you slay the dragon, that that maybe it's not just that there's this unique sword of whatever that is, dev spawned, or created, that it's just the volume of items that the dragon has collected while it was alive. I don't know. It just makes for a nice cycle, and it makes so that there's no, game created
Helps reduce
items.
inflation as well, because you're.
Yes.
I mean, essentially, what happens though is if you have mobs that will loot you, if they can kill you, then you're only going to go to levels where you overpower the mobs, because there's no reward in that. You just have to go places where you're just so much higher level than they are. And I know we're not talking about levels, but we're talking about higher, lesser difficulty.
Where maybe you have
Interesting.
to be more creative about dealing with the mobs.
Yeah,
It's not just an aggro them and pull them out and kill them one at a time thing.
Which
Or-
people do all the time, yeah.
an idea of roaming bosses. And
Yep.
we've seen before in WoW when people have like hacked the game and spawned a giant boss inside of Stormwind or whatever, and the carnage that ensued. We hate dying, of course, but it's something that we all talked about. The video gets seen millions of times and stuff like this, and today's boss is he's out on the prowl. He likes human jerky, and needs more human meat to make more human jerky or whatever, and
Hate to see the drying rack for that.
yeah,
But the cost in beating a boss in WoW, if you die, I mean, you're not going to lose your gear or anything. So
Yeah, but that's one of the things that I enjoy about Eve. I mean, I don't like to die in Eve. I'm the worst PvP player in the game. I die when I get into a fight with somebody. There's only been like 1 or 2 occasions where I didn't lose my ship. But you know what? That possibility of losing makes me think a lot harder about when I engage somebody and how I deal with that situation. And
well, exactly, which is what I was saying, is that you're only going to go into a situation where you feel like you have the upper hand. You're never going to just try a dungeon for fun. You're only going to go in there if you think you got it,
And
well,
the other
that's not
thing
necessarily true, because those dungeons need to be discovered, and you need to figure out what's going on in there. And
upside down.
and we also can say, in these dungeons, does it have to be that a dungeon is a certain level, or can it be that a dungeon that's not taken over time, that the monsters get stronger and stronger in there? Or is it that you're like hanging off the ceiling, dude?
Yeah, I know. I was just like, wow, upside down. That's annoying.
Yeah. Or is it that that there can be some sort of randomness or something, and allow there to be some sort of knowledge on the player's part as to whether or not they're going to have any success in there. And if it's too much, too big of a deal, well, you got to go find easier prey. When animals go out hunting, I don't know, do animals know when the prey is too big for them? Maybe, typically not, but there might be some laying in wait, which is not fun, but I'm just talking.
Well, I mean,
you're
a
gonna step
bunny's
foot in
not
the
going to
dungeon,
go
you're
fight
gonna-
a fox.
You're going to look up a couple of mobs, you're going to say, these guys are way too strong for me, and then you're going to leave. I mean, that's basically what you do if you don't know what kind of dungeon it is.
Yeah.
I think you should be able to, say, inspect a mob of some sort to find its health or its damage and things like that, because rather than sort of going into attack something, or even as the game progresses, like you have dragons, a certain amount of damage it does, so people know oh, starting the game, they can't kill a dragon, but they can kill rats and other sort of menial things. But once you start off, say, sort of get to level 50 in swords, and you do a certain amount of damage, so you do sort of 400 damage per second, then you know you've got a chance against a dragon. But
Yeah.
I think at the start, I mean, because we haven't got levels, so it's going to be hard to actually determine whether you can actually attack a mob or not.
But I mean, modern
that's
modern MMOs give you that indicator. They'll tell you if it's red, it's too hard. If it's yellow, it's a challenge. If it's green, then don't waste your time. You're not going to get. It'll be too easy. And don't make it hard. Like someone has to look up the numbers. Okay, how much health? How much is my DPS? And figure it out for
No,
themselves.
it needs to be fun, which means that it has to be easy. That you have to be able to get into the action within just a few steps.
I think color coding is a good idea, but that's going to be complicated with the amount of skills you have and the different skills you're going to have.
Yeah.
Well, as long as you can break things down to DPS and defense numbers, you can do it that way.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Okay. Well, maybe the topic of monsters, bad guys, the hunted, whatever we want to call them, should be a subset or its own thing, as opposed to dungeons. And I don't know. I think we would all agree that it's very likely to find hostile creatures within the dungeons, but what are the? Let's see if we can define what these dungeons look like. What is a dungeon in the game?
Maybe it could be based on the environment it's found in. For instance,
True.
if we could use dungeon as a generic term, and say, for going back to the example of people mining out an area, like we did in the last one or the one before, where you have a prospector that mines out a shaft of gold and a shaft of iron, and there's this big cavern available now. Maybe there's only one room. Maybe you want to add rooms. You bring people in to carve out the rock and it becomes a bigger space or multiple room dungeon. I mean, some dungeons might end up being just one room and there's a bunch of orcs hanging out in there sleeping, or maybe it's a very complex dungeon where it goes down several levels. You found an old dwarven stronghold that's been taken over by goblins. All of a sudden you have a level of complexity where you might find a really huge mob down in that dwarven stronghold, but there's going to be choke points where you're going to have only a couple monsters able to attack you at once. And a dungeon might be you find a hidden valley through a mountain pass, and you have this big wide open area that's not necessarily a quote-unquote classical dungeon, but for the terms of the game, it's counted as a dungeon.
Okay, well, let's talk about that, though, then, because typically when I think of dungeon, I'm thinking of instanced content. I'm not thinking about open world content. So what are we referring to when we say dungeon? Are we just talking about like a physical structure? Or are we talking about the difference in being able to scale a level to something so that it's instanced rather than open world content?
See, I don't know how they're dealing with whether events are going to be instances or just open world content on a smaller scale. I mean, so this is completely open at this point as a subject matter.
Right. There is the ability for both. And there may be reasons to have some stuff instanced, especially if they're personal dungeons, as opposed to just being part of the open world.
Yeah.
That may... dungeons are a closed space. In the housing and everything, we want it to be an open world. So when you walk by somebody else's house, you're kind of peering in the windows. Ooh, look at that nice stuff, or whatever. Or you wave at your neighbor as you walk by. But dungeons typically only have one or two entrances. And
if you go into their house, is that open world content or is that instance?
that's still open.
Oh, cool. Even inside. Okay,
Yes. And so you see the person inside the house as you're walking by.
that's cool.
Dungeons, though, there doesn't typically tend to be this passing by and seeing it, other than maybe something at the entrance, and so there's no need to use, the open world resources for that when it could be instanced, and maybe it's just an instance that anybody who goes in is in that instance, and that instance is that dungeon, as opposed to, a group of 5 going in to the entrance, and then 5 minutes later another group of 5 goes in, and they're in 2 different instances. I don't feel like that should be right. That they should all end up in the same thing, and the other ones just need to catch up or whatever.
If we
Or
do
they
end
see
up
them coming out.
Yeah.
if we do end up doing custom dungeons, you could have the dev dungeons being instances, then the custom dungeons that they're just kind of open out in the world, like the houses.
But nobody's going to associate them being dungeons if they're open.
Exactly.
And you can also bring 500 people.
Yeah, the reason why they're instances is because you need to be able to control the challenge level. If 500 people roll into a dungeon, the mobs don't look too big anymore, and it's really not that big of a deal.
Yeah, but even then, with 500 people in a dungeon, you can only bring so much firepower to one small section. There will be choke points for both sides. And if you got a bunch of goblins sitting in an open area and there's a 6-foot wide door, all they have to do is rain arrows on that door, and anything that comes through is going to get killed. Because you
But then
have
it doesn't
150
matter how many.
goblins.
Then it doesn't matter how many the other side has, be it 5 or 500. Everyone's gonna die.
Well, it's a matter of strategy.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but if I see the person in front of me dying because he just became a pincushion for a bunch of goblins, the last thing I'm going to do is go through that door. I'm going to start looking for secret passages, dude.
Sure, but that highlights exactly what I'm talking about. When you add more people into the dungeon, it becomes easier because you can learn so much quicker from that.
Yeah.
Once you see all those people dying, well, you go a different way. And you can't do that if it's an instance dungeon. Only 5 people can go in because you're all going to get wiped the first time you guys, walk into the open or whatever.
Well, this could also be a motivator to create a party that's bigger than just a few people. Now, this, of course, leads to more loot sharing, but you're guaranteeing that you'll wipe out whatever's in the dungeon.
Well,
And sometimes that's a good thing. If you're being
there is one interesting thing they can do. Let's say you bring 5 people. Every mob has maybe 0, maybe 2 abilities. If you bring more, they get additional abilities. Adds a complexity to it.
Sure, so that's difficulty scaling as far as automatically scaling up the difficulty of the dungeon based on how many people come in.
Well, they won't increase the number of mobs, but some of the abilities are going to be defensive, some of them going to be healing. So you don't want to bring a huge amount of people. Sometimes you do.
Well, either
Also-
way, there's I really think that it should be a self-limiting process, though. I don't think it should be
There should
determined.
be a max amount of people you can bring.
Boy, I wish. I wish. I almost wish like we had somebody who's a game developer who's built dungeons before that could shed some insight on what their thoughts were when putting them together, so that we can have fun.
Give me a beer and I'll be a
actually,
game developer.
Give you a beer and you'll act like a developer.
Yeah, I'm starting now.
Oh goodness.
I've developed not necessarily dungeons, but I've done the artwork in them.
I don't know.
Well, here's the thing. Dungeons, quote-unquote dungeons in EVE, because they call them dungeons. They're instance, based like we're talking about. Missions that they give you. There's no limit to the number of people you can bring into that
That's true.
instant. But you know what? After the extra 50th person, nobody's doing anything.
Well, also, if when there's that many people, you are, you are splitting the experience
Yeah.
and splitting the loot. And so the more people that you bring in, the easier that it is, the less
However-
loot there is for everyone, the less of a reward. And so maybe that in itself is enough
self-limiting.
to keep the groups to the appropriate size for running a particular dungeon.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Because there is no limit in Eve. I mean, if you want to bring in 2,000 of your best friends and they're all in
Except
Rifters
that
in
you'll
a level 1 mission.
crash the server.
Well, that depends on how
we
fast
had,
they
we had what,
reinforce it.
300 of us, and we puked some of the servers when we were doing our drunken roam.
Yeah. Well, we don't know how Avitus would handle all this.
No,
That's the
I
thing.
don't. But I do.
So, I mean, but I'm just saying as a looking at it from we are developing this video game. I don't think there should be a cap on the number of people that can fit in except the things that make sense. For instance, if you have a one-room dungeon and there's 20 orcs in there and you can't convince them to come out and fight you, you're not going to be able to fit 200 people in there to kill those 20 orcs. You're just
Probably not.
Okay. However, if you got one guy sitting outside the dungeon or outside that space, and he's saying, "Hey, you big fat ugly orcs," and they're like, "Yes, we are fat. Yes, we are ugly. Thank you very much. Let's kill him." You know, they'll come out, and then your archers take out the orcs. Well, now you've assessed the risk that you're dealing with. You've dealt with some of the orcs because some of them will get back into the space, and then you can go in and wipe out the rest. I mean, it's an organic process is what I'm getting at. I want that level of there's danger there. We know what we could be dealing with. We might not know what we're dealing with, but figuring this stuff out.
Okay,
You know?
so
I have an idea. What about
Okay.
no limitation on people that can join in, but have a limit on what they can wear as armor or weapons?
ooh, you gonna make them undress at the dungeon entrance?
Yeah.
Or scaled attack abilities.
Well, that's an interesting idea, but I'll have to say I don't like it.
Yeah, I don't either.
Well, if you
I think that depends on how cute.
underwater dungeon and you have to wear plate mail, then you're sinking. So
Well, you're probably not going to be wearing plate mail in a really enclosed environment where you can barely move.
I
That
would
makes
be.
sense.
I'd be wearing it if I had it.
Or you probably won't be using a bow and arrow in a really enclosed environment, like caves
Yeah.
where it's dark, you can barely see.
I mean, that stuff like that will auto limit the players.
If the idea is to have a fixed reward for a dungeon, let's say X amount of experience and X amount of loot, and whoever completes the dungeon, it's divided equally, then what's the advantage of making it an instance versus just making it an open world content?
It's just instance because it removes it's just a technology thing, and it just removes it from the load around the
easier on the
surrounding
server.
area.
It's
And-
usually run on a separate server as well, so they're faster.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you don't want to have if you own a home that is in a very, very high traffic area, then you may experience some issues with that. And I would hate to own a home at a dungeon entrance, and every time the big raids came in, I lost connection or something like that. I'm not saying that that's going to be a problem with the technology. I'm just saying that this is something I've
It's a
experienced
possibility.
before.
Yeah.
Okay,
And-
so there's not like any game reason other than it's just a technical limitation, really.
I also have more than one group can go in at a time. That's the point of instances. So
Well-
you don't have a single group.
But isn't that not the case? Though, if any number of people can go in, then you really only have one instance per dungeon, right?
Yeah, that's what I really want to see. Now, if it's wanted that everybody who's not in a group who enters into a dungeon gets a new instance of that dungeon, then I suppose that could be done as well. To me, that I hate instancing like that, and I hate that if I say I'm in particular dungeon, come join me, that if they enter into the dungeon, they end up in their own instance. or we have to go through the trouble of forming a group or whatever to work together. That's not as interesting to me as it is to be able to just show up because I know my friends are there or whatever.
I don't like the idea of it does not make any sense to me that there should be a new instance created simply because somebody new as a separate group came in. That's the big thing that has always annoyed me with video games is I want them to make sense in a intellectually meaningful way. I mean, this is the first time I've ever done anything like trying to develop a video game or help somebody develop a video game, but when I look back at all the reasons I stopped playing video games in the first place, it was always because I would go to the same manhole cover that somebody else did. They would disappear into the manhole, and then I would them again because they finished the dungeon faster than me. And it just makes no sense. Now, if you have for instance, a gateway that transports you to a different space, a different physical space, every 10 seconds, it changes locations. That makes sense to me, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the same dungeon, same space, same monsters, same loot.
Yeah, I agree with you. It makes no sense to me that you can run the same dungeon 10 times, kill the same exact mobs, and get the same loot.
Yeah.
Like, what do they do? Go shopping for loot in between? It doesn't make any sense. But that's how every dungeon I've ever been in is like.
I really want our dungeons to be more dynamic, and meaning that that I'm not sure what I'm going to see in there when I go into it the next time. Not that the whole thing is the pathways are all different and everything, but I just want to come around a corner and say, oh shit, orcs moved in, and they're about to club me or whatever.
Run away!
Yeah, I want to be surprised when I go in, but I want to have familiarity.
Yeah.
And
well, that's why I stated at the beginning, the structure is static unless the players change that structure. Okay. For instance, you have a structure that we'll go back to the mining instance that I was talking about earlier. Well, somebody takes over the mine and adds in two separate doors. One door says free gold this way, the other door says certain death this way.
I go for the free gold and then I die.
You always go for the free gold unless you're thinking that it's a dangerous trap and blah blah blah. Well, built the dungeon, made two separate passageways that connect to the same spot, and if you come to that connection point, there's a further single passageway that goes down. However, you see a sign in front of you that says certain death pointing this way down the passage. If you're looking from the other way, it says free gold this way pointing down the passage. Okay, some player made that just for shits and giggles, but everybody goes through the free gold door. They still come to the certain death, but there's a level of difference there that would not have been there before.
So like for a player-made dungeon, we're probably going to have mining skills to dig them out.
Or hire NPCs or something like that.
Well, and it may be a side effect of gathering resources that, when you're digging in the side of the mountain that, you create an opening and you just keep going in following a vein of whatever.
Yeah.
And,
But you're thinking about dungeons in the sense of it's under the ground. It's like a real physical dungeon. But that isn't what a dungeon has to be.
No, it's not. A dungeon could be inside a castle. It could be in a field. It can be anywhere, but
I understand the whole wanting familiarity thing.
I just want to, okay, so the way I see it, the way I'm thinking of it right now, of how things could work, is there are dev-made dungeons, and they are a lot more static. player-made
Yeah.
dungeons are that maybe if you own land that's right next to rock, that you can actually start digging in and create yourself a dungeon. You know, and do, you know, whatever. You know, the further you dig in, and the deeper you go,
The more space.
the more space there is, the more minerals you're able, you know, and resources you're able to take out, and then you know, certain things happen that, or certain configurations happen, or whatever, that cause hostile creatures, whatever they are, to then
Wanna move in.
yeah, take residence. And then as they build up their own personal loot or whatever, they get more hostile and aggressive to protect it.
Yeah.
I don't know how, though. Let's say we have 100,000 people in the game playing, and you know, we have a landmass of certain size. I do not want to go along and see a damn hole in the rock every single, you know, house.
Which is kind of brings up the question I had, which is like, let's say I wanted to build a dungeon. I build a dungeon, and no one comes visits it. I mean, if there's so many of them and they all are mediocre because we're not that great at it yet, then that does not make the game fun. That makes the game really unfun.
But if the difficulty level of of whatever dungeon it is, whether area, whatever, the difficulty level goes up as time passes, then you'll have groups that will be looking for dungeons that have not been touched in a while, because they know that it's going to be more of a challenge, more experience, and possibly more loot.
Yeah,
And plus, not all 100,000 people are going to want to build their own dungeon. I'm looking at
I
like,
agree.
yeah, I mean, plus if you have a bunch of dungeons in one area, there's a random possibility that those dungeons might end up connecting accidentally.
Well, I thought about that too. You know, in Minecraft, when you're digging along and you're playing with other people, sometimes you come across, oh, somebody's already been through here. And, you know, that can be good, that can be bad. You know, I could just totally see this, that we end up creating a whole underworld, a whole labyrinth.
But I mean, you guys aren't really digging down and creating something. I mean, I heard there was no terraforming. Is that right?
At this juncture.
Yeah, I don't know whether that's a yes or a no. There's no terraforming on a large scale.
Like moving continents around.
But in a instanced scale, where the instance begins after you cross a threshold within a cave or whatever, then that could be different. So, and it could take a long time to build these, you know, especially if it's a resource thing or something like that, where you dig out all the ore out of a wall, and then that wall collapses overnight during server maintenance or whatnot, and you're able to dig further in or something. I don't know.
Have it as a random possibility mechanic. Like, for instance, you have a random possibility of finding more ore, or the vein ceases to be, and then you make it, well, there's a random chance that cave will collapse in. You know?
Custom dungeons also brings forth the issue of people farming.
Yes.
Farming the dungeons.
Yes, and so which brings forth the issue of, okay, should we allow players who own a dungeon to populate it, or figure out, you know, how hard it's going to be, or do we leave it up as a game mechanic that the game, you know, has whatever process it goes through to, you know, put stuff in the dungeon for us, and, you know, can access to the dungeons be controlled? Should they be controlled? And, you know, if they can be controlled, they can be farmed.
If you take a look at Neverwinter, I believe that's what it was called. The way they had it is, after a certain point of custom-made dungeons, you couldn't gain experience from the dungeon. After you killed so many mobs, you couldn't gain any more bonuses from that specific dungeon. So you could try something similar to that.
It
Or
does
maybe
sound
make it
somewhat chaotic to have every player to have his own dungeon. Why not have all the dungeons made by developers? But you can pledge allegiance to the monsters inside living them, and you can help them expand. You can learn to teach the bastards. You can teach
I
them
like that
magic.
idea.
Teach
Oh,
them
so this is
sword
this is another
skills.
skill.
I really like that.
Another skill
I-
of control
Yeah.
or whatever.
Plus,
You're basically making them your slaves, maybe.
pets.
You're teaching them.
NPCs.
And if you don't teach them, they will revolt and they will kick you out, so someone else can take over.
Yeah. I mean,
And
this
more
goes
than
into
one
good and
owner can
evil.
be on one place. That way you can have X amount of dungeons all the time inside the game.
Okay, let me
You can
go.
expand them.
Let me just totally blow this out of the water and say, what if players could play the monsters? And then
That
it
would
becomes
be pretty cool.
And then it becomes a fact of, just like in Eve, where a corporation controls a sector of space, that some sort of group or whatnot, whatever you call a monster group, a hutch or something, I don't know, and a hutch, a clutch, whatever,
Horde.
a horde,
Gaggle.
a horde, and
Gaggle of
and-
orcs.
Gaggle of orcs. And so those are actual players that are playing, and they then try and defend it because they get whatever experience by defending, and the other players get experience by defeating.
But I mean, does the experience increase their monster level, or what
I don't know. What if we all had two characters, available to us in the game? One was of the,
Evil side of the force.
yeah, and one was more of nature. One was more humanoid. Another one was more nature, where the orcs and stuff don't own homes. They don't really own many possessions other than what they can hold right in front of them. They can't access a bank box or anything like that. You won't see them
Why
in
not?
town banking, but
Why not?
well, I don't know.
Why can't there be a good orc?
because
Don't-
it's
That
Don't
really that
define-
just adds factions. I mean,
I don't think that creatures should be defined by their race of birth. That's one of the problems I had with WoW. One of the reasons I
Don't
never
be
played
racist
WoW.
against orcs.
Hey, I'll be that orc, sitting in the town square preaching about not being racist against orcs. I think that would add an interesting twist to the game. Because if you're dealing with good and evil, any creature can be good or evil. Now, orcs may have a predilection towards evil. They might have a predilection towards being chaotic. They might have a predilection to being chaotic evil, which is their nature. But that doesn't mean they're limited, especially
well,
if that orc is a player character.
yeah. If they work as a player character, then it's going to be whatever the player is. But
Exactly.
I think the problem with that is that you're going to say, okay, so what makes this, and what makes it
I think we lost him.
was all that's really good geared, he's going to destroy me. Well, that's okay. We'll put some gear. You collect gear as a monster. Well, before long, you just realize, well, you know what? We just have a new race. It's called the Monster Race, and now we've just got PvP. It's monster versus everybody else.
Monsters Inc.
Well, what I don't want to see personally is I don't want to be in town and have a orc walk up next to me at the bank and do his banking, and that. But I'm going to be friendly with him right here at the bank. But when I get back out to the dungeon, I'm going to slay him.
Well, then
I want it to stay in character.
that then goes to maybe these creatures have a bank as well, just in a separate town.
Yeah, they're horde.
that's just adding factions, though.
Yeah,
It
it's just
is. It
factions.
is. And I don't want it to be. I don't want to replicate WoW and say we're going to the Horde City, and going to try and wipe everybody out. I feel like it should be less interactive, in a sense that I can't talk to a monster, they can't talk to me, I can't tell what's on their mind, my only purpose
That
when I'm
would-
going through a dungeon is to slay that monster, to get their loot, and the monster's only purpose should be that
To die.
no, not to die, but to defend their loot
Yeah.
and to defend their life.
If we did have it where the monsters could talk, it would also tie in to or communicating with the monsters. It would also tie into like the speech skill and stuff along those
Languages.
lines. I think it'd be
For instance, when I was mentioning before about how if you don't have a language, like one character can speak Elvish and none of the other characters can, all they hear is gibberish. Well, it could be the same way for orcs. If they don't know common, they could be talking to the other orcs in Orcish, and you guys would see them, the good guys would see them talking to each other, but only hear gibberishness. You know, unless somebody in the party had Orcish as a language skill, at which point he could translate for everybody.
Well, and you
else.
may bring a translator with your party.
Yeah.
Something like that, and then just by definition of having the translator near you, you can all of a sudden see what the others are saying or hear what they're saying.
Yeah.
But I mean, the idea of some people going into a dungeon and only things that the people in the guys in the dungeon are doing is trying to survive and hold on to the loot and defend against raiders. Those aren't the monsters. The monsters are the people that are going into the dungeon to kill all the things.
Well,
Well,
okay.
that's a matter of perspective.
Yeah, but
that is
that's what I'm saying.
entirely-
The whole point of monsters is that, well, they're monsters. You know, that just by making them that they're not monsters anymore. There's just a different race.
Yeah.
Okay, so how do we though make it? Okay, so let me ask this question a little bit different way. When you go into a dungeon and you come across a monster, and it's an NPC, you expect it to act certain ways. You expect it to be kind of a certain level or whatever, and it it's known after you've battled them a few times. But when you come across another person that is controlling it, and this is one of the beautiful things about MMOs, why the content is so rich, is because when you come across another player in the game, you don't know what they're going to do. You don't know how they're going to act. You don't know if they're going to outsmart you or they're going to be dumb. And that's what I would love to see when I go into a dungeon, that, those orcs are actually, a group of people that are, just hanging out, drinking beers, talking in real life when I walk in and they go, oh, fresh meat,
Yeah.
and I go, oh crap, and run out. But, how can that be fun? Without making. I don't want to make these big horde and these different factions and everything.
Well, there would have to be some kind of incentive to play a monster, and I don't think that there's any. It's not obvious to me how that would never be any incentive for that. I mean, there's nothing fun about hanging in a room, waiting for people to come in and try to kill you, unless there's some other incentive for that. I don't know.
I think interaction between players and monsters could be really cool, but I don't think players should be playing as monsters.
What about being evil, the evil side of things?
Yeah, but
I guess you could play with them, but you wouldn't be an orc.
Yeah.
But let's say I can play a dragon, and that's all my life. All I want to do is play a dragon. So this is the perfect game for me. And I sit inside my dungeon, 24 hours a day, and every once in a while somebody comes to me and tries to kill me, and I swat him down. And maybe that's good for a few people, but how many people are really going to want to do that?
Well, that also makes the assumption that you're trapped in the dungeon and you can't go out. Now, suppose you're that boss guy that goes roaming around, raiding villages and stuff. Well, that gives incentive to other players to come swat you. Or maybe they'll sneak into your dungeon while you're out flying around making people jerky, and take in and steal your loot. You come home and half your treasure's missing.
The skill here, the reason why you would want to play a monster here is something for havoc. There are those people who just all they want to do is disrupt and everything.
Yeah.
And
Well, I mean, I'll tell you what, if monsters could loot you after they killed you, that would be all the incentive I'd need right there.
Yeah.
true.
You get to be the goon swarm of this game.
Oh yes, the goons.
We're gonna scam you and loot you, and
And you know what? That's what all the gold
Yeah.
farmers would do too. They'd all sign up to be monsters and sit there and try to kill everybody.
Yeah,
well,
but
that's entirely possible.
Now, it might not be a bad thing, but you know what? Your difficulty rating on your dungeon just went up exponentially because people are so much harder to beat than NPCs.
Yeah, but that would also give people incentive not to go into the dungeon, because people would very quickly spread the word around that, yeah, 3 parties got wiped out yesterday.
Yeah, but at the same time, we just got to make our party bigger so that we can go and take them out.
Possibly. See, this goes back to player-generated content.
Mm-hmm.
You have a bunch of bad guys. They're in a dungeon. The good guys have found this dungeon, and yes, they are all players in the dungeon.
You know
But
what?
this is a PvP zone now.
Mhm.
This is a free-for-all PvP zone.
Mhm.
And if you don't want to be involved in that, you can go find a different dungeon that might be inhabited by NPC orcs.
I kind of envision that I would have a second character that is a monster, and that when he spawns in for the first time, that he is a mouse. And so as this mouse, I've got to go out and try and cause some havoc, whether I'm running around town or whether I'm whatever. I may get
By
squished
default.
right off the bat. But I gotta go get into battle and everything to build up my monster skill, or
You
whatever
could
else we want to call it. And so when I finally get enough skill points in mouse, then I'm serious. Then I can it unlocks rat. And then after I've gotten rat, then it unlocks squirrel and everything, and all the way up to dragon.
You know what's going to happen?
Big sharp teeth.
You could make that
I'm
second
going to be in the
character
starting
level
zone,
based.
and about 1,000 mice will be looking to bite my ankles.
It'll be awesome. What was it we did in Eve in our drunken Rome? We took out some pretty big ships, and we were just 100 of us in frigates. And
noob ships.
and we were in newbie ships. Yeah, we weren't even in frigates. We were in the newbie ships that the game supplies to you when you die, and it has hardly any power. And we went out as this big group, and we swarmed these other ships, and we took them out. And so there really could be several veins that you could go out of being monsters. There could be the varmint. There could be the birds. There could be the insects. There could be, reptiles, which go all the way up to dragons or whatever. And, choose your starting race, and really your earnings are, the havoc that you create, and the fun time that you can have causing mayhem with other people.
Kind of like being the alien from Aliens versus Predator video game, where you start out as a chest burster and you're roaming around all the vents and stuff,
Yeah.
trying to kill people. And at first you're running away from the Space Marines, and then you're eating them.
Yeah.
You could have that second character level based, and just have them work up the scale, and it's just purely level based.
Yeah,
And-
I'm about to say that myself. Yeah, just have skills
I'd-
for the humans, and then level base for the mobs, and then as Marky said, different race of them. So you start with the vermin, or you start with birds, going all the way up to pterodactyl or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And even the birds can actually sort of equivalently go into a dragon because they fly. So you could have ultimately any line you pick could eventually turn up to a dragon.
Or you could have your character have a transformation skill.
I disagree with the concept of making them non-skill based, of making them level based. I think you should be able to earn skills through experience.
Mm-hmm.
And-
Yeah, I actually do too. But as you, it's just like we talked about with the skills of reading more books, doing more things, raising your skills, unlocking new
Possibilities.
New possibilities. It could very well be the same thing for for all of those, because you could be a regular squirrel, and then you could be like, I've learned how to sharpen my nails, I've learned how to sharpen my teeth, and now I've learned how to infect you with rabies.
And the other thing is, if you take and make it so that it's all skill based. Now,
oh shit! So did you see what the chat room just said? I
What?
could be a Marky Dragon.
Oh, look at him suck it up!
Yeah,
Look at him suck it up!
Yeah. Hey, I want to be that. I want to be that dragon named Marky.
Yeah, but by making it skill based, now let's say that your squirrel learns how to read, and a bunch of you have killed this player, and he dropped a book, and you know how to read common.
But,
All of a sudden,
this is just
you
turning
could
into a
start
faction,
earning
though.
those.
This is just another faction. This is Monsters faction versus
Maybe,
non-Monsters
maybe.
faction.
But how do we keep it from being a big faction? How do we
think
keep all the dragons from banding together?
I think monsters don't have skills at all, but yeah, they can band together. But I think they just shouldn't have skills.
Well, why would you want to keep them from
levels.
banding together? It's an MMO.
Well,
Yeah,
I don't know. But I'm just thinking that in traditional sense, when you go out adventuring and you come across monsters, they may be working in small groups, but you don't come across 100 of them all at one time. That one guy sees you and points, and everybody runs that direction to go get you.
No, that's just because they're NPCs.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
And
Okay.
I don't know about you, but I've played more than a few D&D games where the dragon knew magic spells.
Mm-hmm. And dragons
So
should know
I-
magic.
And there are also lower level characters in, let's say, orc shamans that were able to cast spells as well. I mean, that's a skill. And if we're doing magic as a skill level or skill based thing in here, or
I
the
mean,
possibility of that, I mean, I think you should be able to earn skills or be mentored in skills as a monster.
almost every dungeon I've been into has mobs that have armor, equipment, weapons, and everything. So, I mean, they have to have the same skills that anybody would have, really.
Yeah, that's why I object to the monsters not having or having levels instead of skills, because yet again you're taking out the context whenever you throw in levels. When you say I'm now a second level monster, I've turned into a rat. Well, what's the logic behind that? I mean, it takes the context out.
The evil overlord recognizes your evilness and promotes you to a higher life form.
There you go. But even then, the evil overlord, the bad guy, still has to have skills to be able to promote his minions.
But you can get skills automatically once you've hit a certain level.
I believe this system is pretty much should be discarded, and why not go with you pledge allegiance to someone, and you learn different spells, abilities from them.
Then it's just factions, though.
Yeah, only they know how to breathe fire. So you're gonna still stay a human form. You might get some armor like them. You might tone your skin, but you will have their abilities.
You
And
could
those
just make
cannot be bought, traded, only by pledging allegiance to them. And like orcs are always at war with fairies, so if you're friends with orcs, you can no longer visit the fairy city.
That would be an auto-limiting by choice of the player.
Deal with it. You made the choice.
Yeah. All of a sudden, you're not able to go certain places you were able to go before.
And that's why you need to make friends that can
Well, you could go there,
some
but they
places.
try to attack you, right?
Well,
Yeah.
maybe not attack in like city, but the taxes are going to be higher. Some people are not going to sell something to you.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
An
You
orc
made the
walks
choice.
into an orc walks into the bank.
Yeah.
Sorry, your
problem-
account has been closed with us, sir.
you could just make it all like a transformation skill, and that just you can transform into that rat.
Possibly.
Through potions.
Possible. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
See, I
Yeah,
like
potions is another good idea.
I like the idea of there being two factions, good and evil, and any gradient thereof is like, for instance, you can have a good human and you can have a bad human, an evil human. You can have the same with any other race. That's why I'm like, well, if an orc is a good guy and good by nature, he should have that privilege of being able to walk in. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean he'll get the best prices at the local market. That doesn't mean there's not some sort of racial animus from other people.
Well,
But
an orc isn't the smartest thing on the planet, so you're probably gonna scam him. Like, this apple costs 5 gold,
Well, he's a player.
and the
character.
price says only 2.
well, as a player character, you'd have skill. Your stats would be skewed towards, physical abilities more than mental abilities, and that's a harsh reality because then
but
you
that
have.
doesn't make you any dumber. You can still buy the stuff for the right price.
Yeah, well, then, there's no guarantee that the player will sell you stuff or the NPC will sell you stuff. If you say, well, you sold it to him for 1 gold and you're selling it to me for 5, and it's only because I'm an orc, you say, well, then you don't have to buy here. You can go buy somewhere else.
In some
and-
games,
cuter.
in some games, the players are racist against other races. Here we have NPCs being racist towards players.
That's possible, though. It makes sense.
What would it be like if the game? I mean, just off the top of my head, what would it be like if the game revolved around dungeons and one faction tried to defend the dungeons and one faction tried to attack the dungeons? Would that be the end effect of making these custom dungeons that players be on one side? Would that be? Oh, someone's echoing.
Yeah, it's Mark.
Would that be
Well-
fun? Is what I'm trying to get at. Would that be a fun game to have the MMO revolve around player defended dungeons?
Well,
See,
I believe it
sounds
would.
it sounds like World of Tanks with dungeons.
I'm fine with that.
Well,
I'll come in with my tank and blow y'all up.
Come at
what's
me.
that? A Vickers. What's a Vickers? It's an evil, slow creature with very little armor.
It has steel skin. Okay. I feel like this... I'm not sure that we got anything identified in this episode other than we have a whole bunch of ideas.
Yeah.
And, so we may have to come back to this one. We may have to... we kind of got into, how are the monsters, controlled within the dungeons and everything, but it could be it turned out to be much, much deeper than that. And
Yeah, but it's better to bring up all these ideas now and
oh,
flesh them out.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, because this, so we'll wait and see what NeoJack has to say about this, and if they look at this idea of the players playing the monsters or the players assisting the monsters or whatever, and think that's totally awesome, then maybe we need to look at that some more. Also, the comments in YouTube and then the forums. So if people have ideas for this, for any portion of the game, post them in the forums. That's where those are all getting read, and the good ones are surfacing to the top. So, okay, we're out of time today, folks. So,
Aw.
Again,
yeah, I know. But so I do keep these shorter. Part of the reason is that I can totally see, at least on the videos, what people's attention spans are, and we get up over an hour, and it's only like 3% that watch after an hour. So anyway, but the hardcore people who are really wanting to be in this, I'm sure they're watching the whole things. And
Actually, can I make a suggestion?
sure.
You totally need to have some way to video on a separate video the after talk after the show, because we just come up with some of the greatest ideas during that time.
I can do that if you guys want me to.
I don't. It's a function of, I know you have certain contractual obligations here. I'm just saying that, after we're done talking with you, not that you're a hindrance or anything, just the ideas just start flowing like we.
And that's
we
fine.
follow
If
through.
somebody wanted to record stuff and post it up for everybody, post some links in the forums and everything, that would be fine. The content being submitted to the forums is not limited to just text. You guys can make videos. You can do other stuff on your own, fleshing things out. There'll be a volume of information to where it gets to be too much. As it is right now, us doing a show every day, the ability for the developers to take something that we have said right now, how long will it take before we can see that in game? It gets longer and longer the more stuff we stack up.
Yeah.
That's my only concern, is the volume of information. But if you can provide a synopsis of whatever video you create and post it, and then if in the synopsis they look at that and say, whoa, that sounds really good, let's watch, they may watch it. And take some ideas from there as well. They don't have to come only from these videos that I'm creating. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I can live stream this second half if you guys want me to. It wouldn't be a big deal for me to do that, assuming no one has issues with it.
Usually it lasts about a half hour where we just all have to go then, but it's just some of the ideas that, like even what we're throwing out today during the show, I mean, we came up with over the past couple after shows, you know?
Lorraine,
It's just interesting.
if you're wanting to do something like that, that's fine. Then we can post the links at the next show or whatnot if you have a recording of it up. And you can post links to whatever channel in my Twitch chat at the end of the show if you want. So, anyway, I'm neither here nor there on it, and I think some good stuff could come out of it. So,
New show coming up after dark, drunk brainstorming.
okay, me first. No. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining, and we have another show tomorrow. Tomorrow's show is about Kickstarter rewards, and because this game will go to Kickstarter, it will get its funding there, and this game can happen even without the Kickstarter funds, but it's a way for the community to vote with dollars on what they want to see, and also to get it more attention about... to bring in more fresh people who would be interested in it. So join us tomorrow, same time, and take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.